Why are you quoting the freaking Charlton Heston? They just go through the Bible. Why do they keep doing this? Just use the Bible. Do you remember the movie, The Ten Commandments? No, just quote Exodus. What's wrong with you?
When life throws you lemons, they say, make a YouTube channel, grab your God-free lemonade. In the depths of the dark, where shadows dance and sway, a satanic gospel, a twist in the charade.
Greetings, cult members, loyal subscribers, and casual viewers alike. If you can't tell, I'm getting over a bit of the winter sickies, and I've decided to put on some clown makeup because I am afraid that whatever Chapter 13 has in store for us, this is probably going to be an appropriate choice. Let's get started. No, you know what? Let's just have a little fun before we are ready to tear off our faces, okay? And let's read some of the stuff that you guys had to say on the last video. Joe Harris says, I'm no theologian, but I'm always intrigued by how 500 people claiming to recognize Jesus can be reliable, while one person who actually met him, Mary Magdalene, could see him and mistake him for a gardener. How distinctive looking was Jesus anyway? And while I was thinking about the implications of this, Lori Thantos comes in and says, you're saying you've never met a gardener named Jesus? Lori! Bad. Got the clownery started. Thank you, Lori. Thank you for that. Chapman is commenting on the fact that the authors are quoting Paul Copan, who apparently is famous for saying that Israelite slaves were just like basketball players or extra members of your family. They included the slavery whitewasher. I mean, these guys, they have no limit to how low they're gonna go. YouTube Jace. Ugh, now I know another reason I struggled at uni. The cognitive dissonance was hogging half of my brain. I replied to this and I let him know that I actually failed 10th grade biology because I refused to acknowledge evolution. I wonder how many of you had something similar happen because you refused to acknowledge something from the class that clashed with your religious beliefs. Rob A. Gabor writes, C.S. Lewis wrote fiction, so we should believe that the gospel writers weren't writing fiction because when he said he reads the Bible, it doesn't sound like the authors were writing fiction. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote fiction, and he believed fairies hung out in English flower gardens, so that can't be fiction, or something. I think that's a great catch, Rob. So what, we need to believe C.S. Lewis because he writes fiction, therefore he knows everything about fiction ever, including fiction that was written in wildly different time periods, fiction that was written in totally different languages? Yeah, good job, guys. I wonder how many times they're going to use C.S. Lewis in Chapter 13. John writes, there's a lot of contortions needed to try to avoid the simple likelihood that Jesus' body was just unceremoniously tossed into a mass grave. The stories that arose around that are a good historical case study of how mythologies are formed and perpetuated over time. That's definitely one of the reasons that I enjoy studying religion. Aside from, okay, the stories are interesting and they can be wildly entertaining, it also lets us know how people thought at the time, what people felt was important at the time, and also just tells us more information about sociology, so I think it's a lot of fun. Rabbit Pirate writes, so the too long didn't read here seems to be that if we just accept that the Gospels are an accurate account of what happened, then we can dismiss any other explanation as they don't match the Gospel accounts. Okay, sure, but they have yet to present any good reason why we should take the Gospel accounts seriously in the first place. Right. I absolutely agree with that. I wonder if they're going to make any good cases in Chapter 13. What do you think's going to happen in Chapter 13? Also from Rabbit Pirate, people like Frank and Norm view Jesus and the things he did as the most important events in history. As such, they automatically assume that everyone else must have viewed Jesus and the events of his life that way as well. So of course to them it makes sense that the authorities would have been focused on the early church, and they would have tried to do everything they could to prove Jesus didn't come back from the dead. Jesus is the most important person ever, after all. So of course everyone back then would have been purely focused on him. The idea that they just didn't care never really occurs to them. This really made me think about Piaget and one of the stages of childhood development, and the stage is about ego. And ego here just means thinking of self, not anything that has to do with selfishness. If I show a picture to a child, let's say I have a piece of paper, and on one side the picture is of a lemon, and on the other side the picture's of a bunny rabbit. And I show the kid, hey, there's a picture of a lemon on one side, and I ask, what is it? And they say a lemon. And I flip the paper over and I say, what do you see? And they say a bunny rabbit. Cool. They know that there's a lemon on one side and a rabbit on the other. If I hold it up to them and say, what do you see? And they say, I see a lemon. That means that the bunny rabbit picture is pointing at me. But if I ask the child, then what do I see? They will say, you see a lemon. They can't possibly understand that there are other minds. Even though they know that the paper itself has two images on it, they think that whatever they see is what the rest of us also see. This is one of the reasons it can be kind of hard to communicate with kids during that stage. It's hard to get them to see things from other perspectives. They don't have this theory of mind, that other minds exist outside my own. It seems like Frank and Norm never progressed past that stage. So this other one from YouTube, Jace, I thought was really good. Barnabas' name implies that he was a militaristic messiah that had been captured, pointing at the Jews' desire being towards taking the Holy Land by force, ignoring Jesus because of his more peaceful message. I thought that was a really interesting interpretation. Thank you guys for including these. I really love it when you guys add your thoughts, your interpretations, your experiences, etc., because we get really cool stuff like this. I love it. Chapman really digs into Gary Habermas, saying, quoting Gary the Goldfish, guy claimed he remembered words from Anthony Flew, but Gary didn't remember it right at all. He didn't remember what was said, didn't remember who said it, and didn't remember the conclusion to the story correctly either. And this was a filmed event Gary was misremembering while boasting about how good human memory is. Gary could have gone back and checked, but he assumed he was right instead. Well, then that's why the authors used him. Great minds think alike, right? Jonathan Ramsey reminds us that we don't need to offer alternative theories or evidence for alternative theories. That's not how this works. Apologists aren't offering the resurrection as their own theory. They claim it's absolute and true. Alternatives are merely plausible explanations that fit the known facts. No one is offering a plausible explanation. She's saying that it must be true. Just offering a plausible explanation shows that you can explain what we know without supernatural elements. We do the same for Joseph Smith or the Quran. We all, including Christians, see masses of people who believe things that we can easily explain away. No Christian is sitting around trying to prove the supernatural claims of the Quran or the Book of Mormon aren't true. A guy made stuff up. People believed him, and maybe these are good reasons that they believed him. Maybe these are reasons that he believed himself. That's all. That's it. It really is. I don't know what the authors don't understand about this. None of their arguments, if used for a different religion, would be convincing to them to convert to that religion. I don't know why they think it's going to be convincing to us to become Christian. This one from Unhandled Exception I thought was pretty fun. Say 6 people wearing robes carried the corpse of Jesus into the tomb. Later, 7 people wearing robes leave the tomb and no one noticed the difference. That's right, maybe Jesus never was put into the tomb. It was all a ruse. Or it really was a miracle and Jesus was resurrected. Which seems more likely? That's the thing, right? There's so many alternatives that we could just come up with. And just like Jonathan mentioned, we don't have to come up with these alternatives, but there's so many other options. Bizarre that that's all they will accept. Thank you guys so much for your comments. It's awesome, helps the algorithm. Plus, you guys just have great stuff to say. Now let's get into chapter 13. Pause now and see if you can guess what chapter 13 is going to be covering about, is Christ God or was he just a moral teacher? What do you think the authors are going to bring up here? Once you're ready, let's get into it. Chapter 13. Who is Jesus? God or just a great moral teacher? Now, I will say that even as a Christian, I did have some trouble with Jesus as depicted in the Bible. When you're just a regular Christian sitting in the pew and listening and not really reading the Bible or analyzing it all that much, yeah, Jesus sounds like a pretty nice guy, pretty great guy, seems kind of revolutionary, nonviolent, that sort of thing. But as I started growing in my faith and reading the Bible, I found Jesus to be kind of just like a regular dude. Sometimes he got angry about stuff, and sometimes I found him to be pretty condescending. And I just thought, that's not the Jesus that I was taught about. This seems like some guy. And then I'm not really sure what great morals we really are learning from him that weren't talked about before. I mean, the idea of nonviolence was talked about before. Asceticism was brought up. I'm not sure if you would consider asceticism to even be great morals. Maybe the idea of not overindulging and just kind of living in the moment, that's something that Jesus mentioned and also was mentioned before him. So I'm not really sure if he's even a great moral teacher as much as a great plagiarizer. I'm already taking issue with just this title. I think the makeup was appropriate today. The quote that we have here, "There are none who are as deaf as those who do not want to hear." And this quote comes from Barry Leventhal. This definitely sums up what the authors think, that the only reason that we're atheists is because we're choosing to do it for our own personal reasons. Deep down, we know God is real. We know Jesus is the Son of God, but we're just not paying attention because we really want to sin. It makes more sense when you're a Christian, you buy into the whole Romans thing that everybody knows, but once you're an atheist, you realize that's not accurate whatsoever. So I really wish Christians and Muslims would listen to us when we say, we just don't accept your claim. I really don't accept that there is a God. There might be, but I don't accept that. You have to give me some kind of evidence or at least a really convincing argument. And so far, nothing has come out, especially from this book. We've established that the New Testament documents are historically reliable. Well, I don't know. Let's just go with it. Let's just go with it for the sake of argument. That is, we can be reasonably certain that Jesus said and did what those documents say that he said and did, including his resurrection from the dead. I can't even give him anything. I can't even give him, the sake of argument, right? They did not demonstrate that the New Testament documents are historically reliable in a way that leads us to a reasonable conclusion that a person or a God-man resurrected. So they're just kind of speaking stuff into existence. For a bunch of guys that really don't like new age nonsense, they sure love speaking things into existence and manifesting and putting it out in the universe to make it true. That's really all I'm getting out of this. So who is this Jesus? What did he say about himself? Is he really God, as Christians claim? Before we investigate the claims of Christ, we need to take a look at the messianic predictions we've been alluding to in recent chapters. Were they? Did they allude to anything? Was I just so... all I remember of the past chapters are just periods of being frustrated. That's pretty much it. I don't remember this part, though. This will help us discover Jesus' true identity. And it will also provide further evidence relating to the authenticity of the New Testament. We start on the campus of UCLA in the mid-60s. That's where we're going to learn about Jesus and the authenticity of Jesus and who Jesus was. Some campus in the mid-60s of the 20th century. Unless Jesus was some California hippie, this isn't going to get us where we want to be. This is such a bizarre thing. The authors keep doing this. Instead of referring to the Bible, they'll refer to C.S. Lewis. So of course, who better to tell us about Jesus than the UCLA mid-1960s? Okay. The Messiah and the Trick Bible. I wonder what this is about. In early 1966, Barry Leventhal was a young Jewish man on top of the world, an offensive captain of the UCLA football team. Barry had just led UCLA, a team predicted to finish last that year, to its first ever Rose Bowl championship. "My life was great," he remembers. "I was a hero. People loved me. My Jewish fraternity chose me as the National Athlete of the Year, and I basked in the glory of it all." There's a footnote here. Is the footnote going to be to Hank Hanegraaff or something? Somebody totally unrelated. Soon after the Rose Bowl victory, Barry's best friend, Kent, said that he had come to know Jesus in a personal way. "I had no idea what Kent was talking about," Barry said. "I thought he'd always been a Christian. After all, he'd been born into a Christian home, just as I had been born into a Jewish home. Isn't that how a person got his particular religion? You inherited it from your parents." There's this stereotype about people who go to college on a sports scholarship that they're not intelligent enough to actually get into college on their own. And I'm not going to say whether that's true, but I am saying it's true in this case. You think religion just gets passed on from your parents? Barry, please. But Barry was intrigued by the change in Kent's life, especially when Kent said to him, "Barry, I want you to know that I thank God every day for the Jews." "Why in the world would you do that?" Barry asked. Kent's answer truly surprised him. "I thank God every day for the Jews for 2 reasons. I know I changed his voice. Just roll with it. "First, God used them to bring me my Bible. And second, and one most important, God used the Jews to bring his Messiah into the world, the one who died for the sins of the whole world, and especially for all my sins." Well, to this day, I remember the impact of those few simple but true statements, Barry recalls. Genuine Christians don't hate the Jews after all. In fact, they truly love us and are grateful and honored that God has included them by faith into his forever family. Isn't that an adoption term? Isn't that an adoption term sometimes for pets? Is he saying the Jews are pets? Let's not, you know what, this story probably didn't even happen. I'm not going to dig that deep. A few weeks later, Ken introduced Barry to Hal, the Campus Crusade for Christ leader on the UCLA campus. Do you guys remember, were you ever part of Campus Crusade for Christ? Oh my goodness. We had these pray around the flagpole things that we would do. It wasn't very popular. It was like once a year sort of thing or twice a year sort of thing. But that was one of the things that the church encouraged us to do, was this Campus Crusade for Christ. Unfortunately, I was a little bit more into the devilish Dungeons and Dragons. At that point in my life, I'd started reading a lot of the Bible and trying to really explore whether things were accurate. I didn't question the Bible. I just thought other people were interpreting it the wrong way. So I really got into D&D, and that was a big fun time. So yeah, no Campus Crusade for Christ. One day, Barry and Hal were sitting in the crowded student lounge when things got very tense. As Hal was showing Barry that predictions of the Messiah from the Old Testament were fulfilled by Jesus, Barry blurted out loudly, "How could you do this?" "Do what?" Hal asked. "Use a trick Bible," Barry charged. "You got a trick Bible to fool the Jews." What do you mean by trick Bible?" Hal asked. Barry responded, "You Christians took those so-called messianic predictions from your own New Testament, and then you rewrote them into your edition of the Old Testament in order to fool the Jews. But I guarantee you, those messianic prophecies are not in our Jewish Bible." No, Barry, that's not it at all," said Hal. "No, that's trick Bible," Barry shouted as he jumped up. Again, Barry, you're really not trying to go against that stereotype that you are not intellectually capable of being in college. "No, it isn't," Hal said, again, amazed at the charge. I've never had anyone say this before. Please sit down." People began to stare. "No, Hal, this relationship is over." "Barry, sir." Okay. Barry, wait a minute. Don't you have your own Tanakh? In brackets, a Jewish Bible. Yeah, I got one for my bar mitzvah. So what? Well, why don't you write down these verses and go read them in your own Tanakh? Because that's a waste of my time," Barry blasted. "Those verses aren't in the Tanakh." "Please," Hal persisted. "Just write them down and check them out for yourself." The two men volleyed back and forth until Barry, wanting to get Hal off his back, agreed to check them out. "All right," he said as he scribbled the references down. "I'll check them out, but don't call me. I'll call you." Barry left, never expecting to see Hal again. He didn't check the verses for several days, and then guilt began to gnaw at him. "I told Hal I'd check them out," Barry recalled, "so I should at least do that and put this Christianity thing to rest for once and for all." That night, Barry dusted off his old Tanakh, the one he hadn't even opened since he was 13. I like how they phrase this as if that's not every Christian in their Bible, and was shocked at what he found. Every prediction Hal had referenced was indeed in the Tanakh. Barry's initial reaction was, "I'm in deep trouble. Jesus really is the Messiah." But at this point, Barry's acceptance was only intellectual. He immediately began to worry about the implications if he had made his discovery public. "If I accept Jesus as the Messiah, what will my parents think? What will my Jewish fraternity friends do? What will my rabbi say?" More study was needed before Barry was ready to go public, especially on one passage that Hal had referenced several times, Isaiah 53. Before we reveal the conclusion of Barry's search, I don't know what the conclusion's gonna be, guys. Let's take a look at Isaiah 53 and some of the other messianic prophecies he was investigating. So, just to repeat that I really hate how the authors write, let's see how many pages this took. This took about 3 pages, let's say roughly, or all they really needed to say was there are some people who claim that the Isaiah 53 verses were written before or retroactively written, that they were written after the fact to make it look like they're prophecies, but they aren't real prophecies. Here's how we know this isn't the case. Here's how we know they were written before Jesus' time. And then here's how we can read them to know. For example, let's start with Isaiah 53. We did not need 3 pages of this. I'm not sure why they are so set on trying to meet some kind of page count. Was there a word count that they needed to hit before this book could be published? That's all this seems like to me. This doesn't add anything to the story. I don't care who Barry is. I don't care about Hal. I don't care about UCLA in the mid-1960s if I'm sitting here trying to learn about Jesus, just like I didn't care about Apollo 11 when they were hammering about that as well. We're trying to figure out about, is there a God? And you're going off on these cute little story tangents. Is this supposed to be teaching us something? This is more like Family Guy cutscenes. It's ridiculous. It's inappropriate. It doesn't make the book seem as serious as they want it to come across. This just seems really hokey and kitschy, but not in a fun way. The Suffering Servant. In March of 1947, a young Arab shepherd boy, Muhammad Ajib, was watching his sheep 7.5 miles south of Jericho and 1 mile west of the Dead Sea. After tossing a rock at a stray goat, he heard the sound of breaking pottery. What ensued was one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Again, just say the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in March of 1947 and then move on. I don't get it. This is supposed to be a very serious book that's supposed to help atheists get closer to the concept of God or be more comfortable accepting it or convert them to Christianity or something along those lines. In excavations of the area caves through 1956, numerous scrolls and thousands of manuscript fragments were found in pottery that had been placed there about 2,000 years ago by a Jewish religious sect known as the Essenes. The Essenes existed as a group from 167 BCE to 68 CE. They had broken away from the temple authorities and established their own monastic community in the Judean desert near Qumran. One of their scrolls found in Qumran is now known as the Great Isaiah Scroll. Dated from 100 BCE, this 24-foot scroll is a complete book of Isaiah, all 66 chapters, and is the oldest biblical scroll in existence. We are going to check the footnote for this. When compared with the next oldest existing manuscript of Isaiah, the Masoretic text from AD 1000 or 1000 CE, the text is 95% identical, and the 5% variation consists mostly of slips of the pen and spelling differences. None of these variations affect the matter of doctrine. This is an example of the meticulous care Jewish scribes took in copying the scriptures over the centuries. For more on the Old Testament manuscripts, see Norman Geisler and William Nix, General Introduction to the Bible, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Also, just since we're here, Barry's testimony is taken from his chapter in Norman Geisler and Paul Hoffman, editors Why I Am a Christian, Leading Thinkers Explain Why They Believe, and from our personal conversations with him. Oh, okay, so we are still citing personal conversations. But again, who cares? It is currently protected in a vault somewhere in Jerusalem, but a copy of it is on display at the Shrine of the Book Museum in Jerusalem. The importance of this discovery is not just that the scroll predates Christ and is in good condition, but that it contains perhaps the clearest and most complete prophecy about the coming Messiah. Isaiah calls the Messiah the servant of the Lord, and he begins referring to the servant in chapter 42, which is known as the first servant song. However, the servant is most often referred to as the suffering servant because of the vivid description of his sacrificial death found in Isaiah 53. As you read the passage, which is Isaiah 52:13 to 53:12, ask yourself, to whom is this referring? See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So will he sprinkle many nations and kings and shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told they will see, and what they've not heard they will understand. So far, I don't see any similarity to Jesus. I see a servant, I don't see a son. To me, this seems more like a person. If I recall correctly, a lot of Jewish people see this more as a prediction of like the future of Judea or the future of Jerusalem itself or something. It refers to a place and a people, not a single individual. That's as far as I understand. But for me, I don't think this is about Jesus. His appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man. When he came back and just had his dainty little holes in his hands at the end and a little hole in his side, because he wasn't disfigured when he was resurrected, allegedly. This must only be referring to when he was on the cross, but everybody else who was crucified was equally disfigured, so I wouldn't say it's beyond that of anybody. It's weird. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. I don't know, he was kind of jacked, right? He was a carpenter. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. I wouldn't say that's Jesus either. He was loved by his family. His mother and brothers, at least, kept trying to get him to stop preaching so that way he would not be thrown in jail or worse. He seemed pretty loved, definitely by his disciples in a lot of ways. He seemed like a guy that was at least the same as any other. If not, we're trying to be told that Jesus is a guy that's overly peaceful and that he has the peace of the Lord because he is the Lord and all this other stuff. How can he be a man of sorrow? He's not full of sorrow. He's full of joy. He's full of understanding. He might be familiar with suffering, but I would phrase it that he's a man of joy despite being familiar with suffering. Already, I'm not getting Jesus. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. How did he speak to the 500? People were allegedly crowding around or feeding the 5,000. So this is a guy that people were kind of interested in listening to. How does this mean that he's somebody that was widely hated? So which is it? Surely, he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. Why would we consider him stricken by God? That's not something that I've heard about for Jesus. But he was pierced for our transgressions. This was the part that I was definitely told in church. That's how we know, because they pierced him in his side, and he was crushed for our iniquities. But if we're talking about somebody who's harmed for our transgressions or our iniquities, we're going to be using these types of phrases that involve weapons. And we're not going to be talking about shot through the heart, because Jesus gave love a bad name. We're talking about using piercing weapons or bludgeoning weapons. Those are kind of all we got at this time period. So of course they're going to be using this phrasing. I think what the authors are doing, and I forget the term in Latin, like you have an idea now, so you find something from the past and then say, oh, I can read into it a certain way. So the use of phrases like, oh, he says he was pierced and Jesus was pierced. That means that this is about him. Well, first of all, he wasn't crushed. So either we're speaking in metaphors or we're not. But the other thing is we already have an idea of Jesus, this life of Jesus, the death of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus from the New Testament. So if we're going to go back and try to prove that he was somehow predicted, then we already have a bias here. So this is more like confirmation bias and cherry picking. This isn't that, oh look, we found this prediction of Jesus. Because if it's really a prediction of Jesus, and Jesus matches this prediction even 90%, let alone 100%, like the authors think he does, then why would most Jewish people not accept this? Why do most Jewish people say, no, this is not how it's interpreted, and then Christians are saying, nuh-uh, you have to interpret it this way? Who are we going to go with? The people who read it before the guy, or the people who like the guy and they're trying to find a justification for the guy? I'm not saying that you necessarily have to be lying or it makes them wrong, but it does make them definitely more prone to be forgiving in how they interpret things. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray, and each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. What about, it is finished, or Father forgive them, for they know not what they do? He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. No, he volunteered. So he wasn't led, he walked up to it. He was volunteering like a lamb to suicide. And as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And who can speak of his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. What descendants? So that's interesting, right? Are we talking about his followers, or are we talking about his children? Because I've never seen descendants being used for followers, his fans, or his people. There's many ways to describe the people that would follow this guy, right? He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Assigned a grave with the wicked. I guess that would be, just the Christian interpretation that he was put on the cross, and then with the rich in his death, and he was put into the tomb, right? But the Joseph of Arimathea thing, that's not anything that we can really confirm or even assume that this should be true. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. So there we go again. Where's Jesus' offspring to prolong his days? After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. And by his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and he was numbered with many transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and he made intercession for the transgressors. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great. If he's God in the flesh, what do you mean give him a portion? Just talk about yourself, dude. Why are you talking about him separately and then give him a portion of the great? Isn't he you, God? So this doesn't match Jesus. Definitely not the Jesus that they believe, that the authors believe he is. The actual God in the flesh. Let's see how the authors interpret it. To whom do you think this is referring? Well, like I said, not Christ. Barry had a good idea who, reading out his own Tanakh, he was startled at the parallels to Jesus, but he was still a bit confused. He wanted to give his rabbi a chance to explain it. Okay, well that's good. I vividly remember the first time I seriously confronted Isaiah 53, or better still, the first time it seriously confronted me, Barry explains. Being rather confused over the identity of the servant in Isaiah 53, I went to my local rabbi, and I said to him, Rabbi, I've met some people at school who claim that the so-called servant in Isaiah 53 is none other than Jesus of Nazareth. But I'd like to know from you, who is this servant in Isaiah 53? Barry was astonished at his response. The rabbi said, Barry, I must admit that as I read Isaiah 53, it does seem to be talking about Jesus. But since we Jews do not believe in Jesus, it can't be speaking about Jesus. I don't think any rabbi would have said that. Come on, man. Notice there's no footnote here. You know what? We're going to do something we don't normally do. We're going to see what the actual response is. In the beginning of this video, it's kind of a call show, and somebody calls in and asks the question, why is Isaiah 53 not about Jesus, or why don't you accept it is, or why shouldn't a person accept that this is about Jesus? And so let's go ahead and hear what the rabbi has to say.
Isaiah 53, if you take it out of context, which is exactly what Isaiah didn't want you to do, you wouldn't know it's talking about. It could sound like, I don't know who, could be Jesus. But obviously, if you take any book of 66 chapters and just skip the first 52, you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble. So as it turns out, if you read the chapters that introduce it, and Isaiah 53 is the fourth of 4 servant songs. And just very briefly, if you read the chapters that introduce it, Isaiah, our chief commentary on Isaiah, tells us in Isaiah 41, verse 8 and 9, and 43, 10 and 11, 44, 1, 44, 21.
So just checking out the screen here, we have Isaiah 41:8. You, Israel, are my servant, Jacob, whom I chose, the seed of Abraham, my friend. So referring to Israel, and that's how the rabbi explains it through the rest of the video. And there's a link to the video if you want to watch the full thing on your own. Just check that out in the details section below. This makes a lot more sense, and you're telling me that Barry's rabbi didn't know this? That Barry's rabbi just had to say, oh, I mean, yeah, it sounds like Jesus, but we just automatically dismiss it because that's what the authors are saying. He's saying that the Jews automatically dismiss it because we're Jews, therefore we can't accept Jesus, just like they're trying to say that the atheists automatically reject supernatural claims because we've already decided the supernatural doesn't exist. That's it. That's what they're saying. That's it. It's the same argument. The argument is nobody's listening to us because of their preconceived notions, because of their stupid worldview, and that's why they won't accept our totally awesome, totally convincing arguments, is because they just have this idea stuck in their head. This is the same argument. It's not even a different argument. Well, no wonder there's no footnote, because this didn't really happen. Ugh. Barry doesn't know a lot about formal logic at that point, but he knew enough to say to himself, that doesn't sound kosher to me. Wait, do Jewish people say that? Not only does the rabbi's so-called reasoning sound circular, it sounds evasive and even fearful. Today, Barry observes, there are none who are as deaf as those who do not want to hear. You know, I wonder if Barry is one of those Christians that makes up a backstory and then sells the backstory. Like, oh, you need to listen to this guy because he was a Jew, but then he got convinced to become a Christian. This is very Paul, isn't it? And isn't that what I said, last chapter, the chapter before about Paul? That he was like the first televangelist? I should be seen as the Messiah for the amount of predictions that I'm making for this damn book. Ugh. For those who do not want to hear, Larry Hellier does a fine job of summarizing the characteristics and accomplishments of Isaiah's servant. Beginning with the first servant song in chapter 42, Hellier makes the following observations of the servant. Why would we skip Isaiah 41? So we start with 42, why aren't we starting with 41 when it tells us who the servant is? So he's elected by the Lord, justice is a prime concern, international ministry, God predestined to his calling, he's a gifted teacher, experiences discouragement, extends to the Gentiles, strong opposition, determined to finish what God called him to do, suffering and affliction, accepts vicarious and substitutionary suffering on behalf of his people, which I think is immoral to begin with, put to death, comes back to life, and is exalted above all rulers. Whoa. Okay, are they doing the footnote here for 3 to refer to Larry Hellier? Because if they're just going to give us the Bible verses, can't the Bible stand on its own? No, I guess it can't, because then the authors wouldn't have written this book. I like how we're given Bible verses, but then we're given a footnote to some other guy's book. Just in case you don't believe the Bible verses, guys, you can read about it from Larry's book. In addition to Hellier's observations, we note that the servant is also sinless, 53:9. Just a casual reading of the passage should leave little doubt that the suffering servant is Jesus. Well, I'm glad we did look it up. I really am, because that was a quick answer. That didn't take long at all. And in fact, it only took longer for me to set it up because I kept accidentally pressing all the wrong settings in my OBS studio. It took longer for me to record it than it did for me to find the answer. That's how fast it was to figure out why Jewish people don't accept it and why it's very, very obvious that it isn't Jesus being talked about in Isaiah, because Isaiah specifically says it's Israel. Wow. In fact, the traditional Jewish interpretation of the servant passages is that they predicted the coming Messiah. Footnote 4, let's find out. Many Jewish rabbis down through the centuries, even before the time of Christ, took Isaiah 53 as a reference to the coming Messiah. See S.R. Driver and A.D. Neubauer, the 53rd chapter of Isaiah according to Jewish interpreters. For example, this work quotes rabbinic opinions saying that the following verses refer to the Messiah. Tender shoot, man of sorrows, he carried our infirmities. He was pierced for our transgressions. See, there's that piercing thing. Why would they come up with that unless they're saying Israel is some sort of Messiah or the Messiah is... No, I mean, if it says it's Israel, then why not even about a person? Maybe a city as a concept of the citizens. I mean, surely the authors have heard this. Please tell me they're going to address this. That is, until the Jews began having more contact with Christian apologists about 1,000 years ago, at which point they reinterpreted the suffering servant to be the nation of Israel. Well, where's the footnote for that? And what do you mean they reinterpreted it? It's written there. The first Jew to claim that the suffering servant was Israel rather than the Messiah was Shlomo Yachachki, better known as Rashi. This is around 1040 to 1105 CE. Today, Rashi's view dominates the Jewish and rabbinical theology. Okay, so explain why it's not. Unfortunately for Rashi and many present-day Jewish theologians, there are at least 3 fatal flaws with the assertion that Israel is the suffering servant. First, unlike Israel, the servant is sinless. To say that Israel is sinless is to contradict and to negate virtually the entire Old Testament. The recurrent theme of the Old Testament is that Israel has sinned by breaking God's commandments and by chasing after other gods instead of the one true God. If Israel is sinless, then why did God give the Jews a sacrificial system? Why did they have a Day of Atonement? Why do they constantly need prophets to warn them to stop sinning and come back to God? This seems really, dismissive of the Jewish people. It's kind of interesting. Second, unlike Israel, the suffering servant is a lamb who submits without resistance whatsoever. History shows us that Israel certainly is not like a lamb. She lies down for no one. Well, yeah, that would just mean that it's a bad prophecy. That doesn't mean that it's not Israel the prophecy is about. It just means it's a bad prophecy. I mean, there's our answer to about it being sinless. Okay, great. Well, Israel's not sinless. It's a bad prophecy. Third, unlike Israel, the suffering servant dies as a substitutionary atonement for the sins of others. So it's a bad prophecy. But Israel has not died, nor is she paying for the sins of others. No one is redeemed on account of what the nation of Israel does. Nations and the individuals that comprise them are punished for their own sins. Yeah, but then we're punished for the sins of Adam? This Johnny-come-lately interpretation of Isaiah 53 appears to be motivated by the desire to avoid the conclusion that Jesus is indeed the Messiah who was predicted hundreds of years beforehand. This would be really useful if somebody predicted Jesus before Jesus, and they explained how Isaiah 53 or the entire book was about a single individual who was supposed to come and hear all the things that he's supposed to do, rather than us looking at something that does say Israel and saying, no, it must mean Jesus. I think that the authors are sort of projecting here about the Johnny-come-lately interpretation, which I already said that they were doing, so again, I've made a prediction that came true. Congratulations on the Messiah. There's no legitimate way to avoid the obvious. Remember, the Great Isaiah Scroll was written some 100 years before Christ, and we know that the material it contains is even older. The Septuagint, which is the translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, including all of Isaiah into Greek, was dated about 250 BCE, so the Hebrew original must be even older. Furthermore, manuscripts or manuscript fragments of all the Old Testament books, except Esther, were found with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there's no doubt that the Old Testament, including the suffering servant passage, predates Christ by several hundred years. One of the problems, though, about this kind of prediction is there was no time. listed. They're not telling us when this was supposed to happen. I mean, if you guys know anything about history, you know it tends to be kind of cyclical. And that's one of the things I'm even teaching my students. If we say, hey, this empire collapsed, what are like 6 common reasons empires collapse or any combination thereof? And my students are able to make these reasonable predictions because they understand that history is cyclical. Because humans just don't learn, because we haven't evolved beyond hunter-gatherers running around trying not to die. This is not special, and in fact I would say it's a case against being a specific prophecy for Jesus, because it was written so long ago, eventually somebody's going to match that. I mean, there's even predictions about Kim Il-sung claimed that he had fit this prophecy or fulfilled this prophecy. And that's not anything the authors would believe, that, oh, Kim Il-sung must be the son of heaven. Why do they think we're going to believe this if they don't believe other claims that are the exact same thing? Hitting the bullseye. If Isaiah 53 were the only prophetic passage in the Old Testament, it would be enough to demonstrate the divine nature of at least the book of Isaiah. I disagree. But there are several other passages in the Old Testament that predict the coming of Jesus Christ, or are ultimately fulfilled by him. These include, and this is table 13.1, Genesis 3:15, God speaking to Satan, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, she will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. The messianic prediction, the offspring of Eve, literally the seed of Eve, will ultimately crush Satan, but this human being, unlike other human beings, will be from the seed of a woman rather than from the seed of a man. Okay, but number one, this isn't God speaking to Satan, this is God speaking to the serpent. The serpent in Genesis 3 is described as being the craftiest animal that God has created. This is not Satan. The idea of this being Satan refers to something from, I believe it was Revelation, where they say something along the lines of, and you, Satan, you old serpent. And everyone said, oh, the serpent. It must have been the serpent that God is talking to in Genesis 3. But if you look back about how ancient religions depict the snake is seen as this bringer of knowledge, this bringer of wisdom. And that's actually what we do see in Genesis, that God told Adam and Eve that if they eat something, they're going to die. It's kind of weird because they don't even know what death is. So to threaten them with something they don't even understand, that's not really a threat. That's just bizarre. So the snake comes along and convinces them, hey, you're going to be more like God because you're going to know things. And what is the snake trying to get them to eat? A fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So not only are they missing knowledge, but they're missing knowledge of something that's pretty important for them to understand on how to make moral decisions, good and evil. So Adam and Eve are totally unable to make moral decisions. They're not going against Yahweh because they hate him or they're trying to be disobedient. They don't have enough knowledge of morality to understand the repercussions of their actions or the implications of their actions, or how their actions could be interpreted against the person who gave them the command. They don't have that knowledge. The snake is the one representing this knowledge giving. And the snake was right. Once you eat it, you'll become more like God. You'll be able to see things more like God sees things. And that's what happened, which is why the snake is evil. This is why knowledge is evil. This is why wise people in the Bible are seen as fools. You need to be like children in understanding. The Bible is pretty consistent in hating knowledge and just turning to obedience only. So this idea that it's God speaking to Satan and that Christ crushes Satan. Christ didn't crush Satan. Satan's still running around. That's what Christians believe. What do you mean he crushed Satan? Crushed Satan how? So this doesn't even make sense for any reason. This is bizarre. Genesis 12, verse 3 and verse 7, God speaking to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. The messianic prediction, seed of Abraham, the offspring of Abraham spoken here literally means seed, not seeds. It refers to only one person, a Messiah, who will ultimately bless the peoples over the earth and rule over the land. But it says to your offspring. That's also a plural. We don't say offsprings. I mean, it says literally means seed, but we understand that in this case, offspring is not singular. I mean, it could be, but where do we see that what do we mean literally means seed? Why not say the original Hebrew that was used here reads seed, and that it's specifically individual? Notice here too that there's no predictions being made. There's no predictions being made that God is speaking to the snake, hey, bad stuff's gonna happen. There's nothing in there that says, and this is something we can use for later. Like there's none of that. This is God speaking to Abraham. By the way, this is going to be like the thing for you to know. There's nothing here about hint, hint, read between the lines. They're reading into this. I mean, we can read into anything. It is 10:53. Let's just find a book. So since I said it's 10:53, I decided to break that down. So it's book 1, Genesis, chapter 5, verse 3. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image and called his name Seth. You see, guys, the messianic prediction here, see, Adam is the first man and God is God. He's the only one. So, he's like the first one, but he's also the only one. But we'll just say he's the first one, like first man and first God. Because Adam was also the only man, like we have the only God, right? And then Adam begets a son in his own likeness, just as God will beget a son in his own likeness. And that son is Jesus. Do you see how easy this is? Obviously, there's no prediction being made here. It's not even reasonable to assume that this is predictive of anything that's going to happen in the future, other than maybe Seth does something that'll be written down. In the same way, none of those verses that the authors have listed make any predictions. There's a promise that's coming from God, but God doesn't make predictions because God knows the future. I mean, at least that's how the theology works. God tells the serpent, things are going to be bad between you and humans. That's not a prediction about Jesus coming. Genesis 49:10, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nation is his. Tribe of Judah, the scepter, the king's ceremonial staff, will not depart from the tribe of Judah until the ultimate king, the Messiah, comes. In other words, Messiah will come from the tribe of Judah, one of Israel's 12 tribes. I mean, maybe, but that's still assuming ultimate king is the Messiah. I mean, Jesus abandoned his post. I wouldn't say that's an ultimate king if he's abandoning his post. Why is he only here for like 30 years? And he's not doing much in those 30 years except for the last few years of his life. Why is this something we should say is like super kingly behavior? I think that's a bizarre thing to do. Jeremiah 23:5-6, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up David as a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. This is the name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness. Messiah will be a son of David, and he will be called God. Somehow the sound totally got switched off, so we'll just kind of cover what I was talking about here. Essentially, there's nothing special that I found in any of these additional verses. And one of the things I noted was that when the authors later say that, okay, look, there's so many things, and who could only fulfill this prophecy? It must be Jesus. For me, I brought up, if we just went with Isaiah, it's kind of like if you get a gift and you present the gift by itself. But when we're adding in all these additional verses that don't really help us, especially since a lot of them don't even make predictions anyway, it's kind of like taking the same gift and surrounding it with tons of cheap little trinkets and candies to present it to the person because maybe you feel like the gift by itself wasn't enough. When you do that, it actually makes the gift look cheaper by comparison, and I think that's what happens here as well. When we could have just looked at Isaiah and analyzed it honestly, we end up instead trying to look at all these other little pieces, and I think that really cheapens the message of Isaiah. On top of that, adding in all this extra stuff, especially because it spans hundreds and in some cases thousands of years, eventually something is going to come along that we can kind of start to fit together, or it just makes it look like we're kind of cherry picking throughout. After all, if this was supposed to be such a big, obvious, from God type of prophecy that was supposed to smack us in the face, that we can't deny at all, that Jesus is the Son of God and he was absolutely predicted for hundreds of years beforehand, then how come none of this is specific? How come it's all in different pieces that we have to put together? And the authors eventually make this analogy about the box top again. And they say that when you look at the puzzle, all the pieces, and think, what is all this nonsense? Only when you see the box top and the picture on the box top, you can say, wow, I'm so amazed. This was something somebody designed to fit together so perfectly. Which tells me two things. Number one, they've never put a puzzle together because I don't need the box top to fit the pieces together. And number two, they don't know how puzzles are made because somebody isn't here cutting them by hand and making them fit together before the full image is even created. That's such a bizarre way to put it. And that's kind of my problem here, where I can take those puzzle pieces and without the box top, I can put them together and or see what image the artist created. We can't do that with what the Bible gives us according to the authors. If we took all of those pieces that the authors say are predictive or prophetic, they don't add up to Jesus. If they did, it would have been predicted very specifically beforehand, and it just wasn't. Another thing that the authors bring up are a couple predictions from Zechariah, and the only reason that I want to bring this up is because they mention that part of it, oh, look at this prophecy was fulfilled, and then there's a section that wasn't fulfilled, and they say, oh, well, that's because it's going to happen for his second coming. It'll be fulfilled at his second coming. There's a quote-unquote prediction in Zechariah 14:4 that the Lord's feet will stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem, and the authors say these predictions refer to Christ's second coming, but the reference to God having been pierced by the house of David, blah, 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 refers to his first coming. So even in Zechariah, they're admitting, actually, this isn't a fulfilled prophecy, but the parts that aren't fulfilled, well, they're going to be fulfilled in the second coming, so obviously it's all the same, and it still works. No, it doesn't work, because it didn't happen, and this is where the authors are really cherry-picking, and I think this one in particular is just specifically terrible, because they're even openly admitting, no, this didn't happen, but that's okay, it'll get covered in the second coming. That's what it was. It was a prediction for the second coming, even though this wasn't differentiated at all in Zechariah, that there's a first coming and a second coming, and this part's for the first coming and this part's for the second coming. We're just going to say that that's how it worked. The authors also make a very bizarre argument that all of these predictions are super specific, which they're not, and that there's no way they could all be accurate unless it was some kind of supernatural thing. And then they bring up this weird argument about psychics, and that's what the footnote 6 is for. So-called psychic predictions cannot compare to those of the Bible. For example, the People's Almanac from 1976 did a study about the predictions of the 25 top psychics, and then it just goes on explaining that some of them are wrong. So isn't it incredible? By contrast, some of the Bible's predictions are hundreds of years in advance, where future circumstances could not be foreseen with all the Bible's predictions. And I make this argument that what future circumstances were foreseen that couldn't have been predicted? Things like descendants will happen or violence will happen. These are not special. If they would have said something like the Roman Empire is going to rise, here's where it's going to rise, it's going to take over your people, and then there's going to be a single individual born of a 13-year-old girl who was impregnated against her will, who married a 40-year-old widower with 2 adult children. That's who's going to be my coming in the flesh. Then that would be something. But they're not talking about unforeseen circumstances in the Bible either. They're just saying vague things. You know, the same kind of stuff about you'll know the end times because of war and famine. Yeah, like war and famine aren't around all the time. Then the authors go back to Barry, who basically decides to become Christian because after his win at the Rose Bowl, a couple months later, everybody forgot, and Barry feels bad about this because he thought that he gets to do one thing in life in his early 20s and then magic will happen and everyone will remember him forever. He's kind of having like an Al Bundy existential crisis. So he decides, well, since Jesus gives me eternal life and none of my winnings in the Rose Bowl were eternal, I must believe in Jesus instead. I wish that I could say I'm poorly summarizing this. I'm not. That's what it says, that Barry had trouble understanding that he can't just do one thing in life and call it good, that he's got to keep working and keep accomplishing things and keeping himself relevant and educated and on top of the game. He got upset with this, so he decides to go to Jesus because Jesus, it's eternal life, so I just do this one thing, pray to Jesus and take him into my life, and then I'm good forever. So, yay, good job, Barry. I'm pretty certain that Barry is just another televangelist who is being very deceptive about his origins as whatever he was before he was Christian, in this case claiming to be Jewish, but we've seen other people claiming to be atheists and so on. This is just a really bad example that they're giving. And again, really, really unnecessary, because this doesn't add anything to the chapter. It doesn't make the book seem any more valuable or intellectual. It just seems hokey. The authors say that the skeptic may say, but you're only interpreting Psalm 22 that way because you now know what happened to Christ. It probably wouldn't have been apparent to somebody living the Old Testament times that Psalm 22 was about Christ, to which we reply, even if that is true, so what? So the problem here is they're not seeing that you can read into something after you know what you want to see. They don't realize that's a problem. And this is when they bring up that puzzle analogy that Jesus is akin to the box top, but they don't understand why the puzzle analogy fails for all the reasons that I mentioned before. To demonstrate my point, I randomly chose Ecclesiastes 10:14, which says, "And fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them?" And I say, look, here in the Bible, we can now, looking at what we have today, we can read something from the Old Testament and say that they're making a prediction about what's happening now. The fools who multiply words are Norm and Frank. And to claim that no one knows what's coming, who can tell someone else what will happen after them, this is the Bible predicting that I'm going to challenge Norm and Frank about their claims on prophecy. Do you see how easy this is? Then we're introduced to the section, Is Jesus God?, where the authors are saying that, yes, in the New Testament, Jesus mentions that he's God. And I'm not amazed at all by this, because we know that the Bible was put together to tell what the current theology was at that time, which is why we have the Apocrypha, all the books that were left out, because they don't match what the theology was at that time. So of course they're going to leave out all the books that talk about anything other than Jesus being God, Jesus claiming he's God, etc. So I'm not impressed that the New Testament claims Jesus says that he's God, or that other people think that he's God. It's that way by design. So it's not remarkable. However, they point out that when Jesus says, before Abraham was born, I am, and they say, skeptics may say, before Abraham was born, I am, is not even good English. It's the wrong tense. Exactly. Jesus isn't worried about grammar because he's quoting the very name that God gave him at the burning bush. And so this is when I am just surprised that they think that we wouldn't know that, because a lot of us know the Bible better than the average Christian. So I was really surprised they even pointed that out. It's obviously a reference to I am that I am, which I was trying to remember how to say that in Hebrew. It's like a yeh, asher, ayeh.
אהיה אשר אהיה.
Okay, kind of close. Pretty good for not remembering that phrase. It's 20 years. Obviously, that's what the reference is. Come on, guys. Did they forget that, atheists know more about the Bible than the average Christian does? Do you remember the movie The 10 Commandments? What did Moses do when he encountered the burning bush? He asked God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of the fathers, blah, 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 then what shall I tell him? And God says to Moses, I am who I am. This is who you are to the Israelites. I am me who's... Why are you quoting the freaking Charlton Heston? Just go through the Bible. Why do they keep doing this? Just use the Bible. Do you remember the movie, The 10 Commandments? No, just quote Exodus. What's wrong with you? What is so wrong with you guys? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. This is my students know better than this. My students know better than this. And if they don't, they got to redo it. I tell them you got to get a reliable source. It's got to be a scientific source. Here's the types of sources that are allowed. And then they go just pull something off of Encyclopedia Britannica. I say, no, do it again. And they aren't even going there. They're just like, hey, so you guys know about the 10 Commandments, right? We're talking about the movie, not the actual part in the Bible. Anyway, so in the movie, did you guys know it actually references the Bible? And in fact, the stuff that God said in the movie, whoa, it comes from the Bible. Did you guys know that? Why? Why is Charlton Heston mentioned when they could just write? Quoting the name God gave to Moses at the burning bush, I am who I am, Exodus 3:13. Why are they doing this? Oh, Ecclesiastes 10:14 already gave us the answer, though. We got it. I am is the self-existent one. He has no past or future because he's eternal. He's not in time. Jesus was claiming to be that eternal, self-existent one. And that's why the Jews picked up stones to stone him. For those who continue to say, no, Jesus never claimed to be God. Well, I mean, who cares? I'm not saying that. I'm saying you guys are bad at what you do. I'm not saying that. We have a question. If Jesus didn't claim to be God, then why was he killed? Okay. Okay. Jesus' crucifixion, which is probably the most well-attested fact from all of ancient history, is difficult to explain unless he claimed to be God. That, can I set a sentence on fire if I don't physically have the sentence in front of me? How do I set this on fire? This is so bad. The well-attested fact from ancient history, we'll just toss that, because they never demonstrated that. But Jesus' crucifixion is difficult to explain unless he claimed to be God. That's like saying, and I brought it up before, that, oh, hey, look, this cult leader was put in jail because he did something that broke the law. That obviously that means he's God in the flesh, right? No, it just means he did something that broke the law, so he got punished for it. In this case, it was probably encouraging people to stop paying taxes, quit your job, follow me, don't get married, don't pay taxes. That probably pissed off enough people that maybe it was against one of the Roman laws, right? Something. I mean, there's so many answers here. Why do you think the Romans would make it illegal to claim to be the Jewish God? So illegal that it was punishable by death. That doesn't make any sense. That's one of the arguments that, well, the Jews had to do that because they're the ones that pushed for this to happen. So Barnabas, or Barabbas, or however his name was pronounced, he was let free because, that's how the legal system works, right? We only got one cross left. Which one do we do? The other guy just gets to go free. That's how legal systems, work. That's how the law works. That's how crime works, right? I shouldn't have done clown makeup, man. I should have done corpse paint with this because these guys are killing me. The unbelieving Jews certainly knew that he claimed to be God. On several occasions, they picked up stones to stone him for blasphemy. Why was it obvious to the first century people that Jesus claimed to be God, but it's not obvious to some of these present-day skeptics? Okay, well, we already explained away this whole thing at the very beginning of this section. Indirect claims to be God, don't care. And now, Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. So he's saying that I'm already was God. Cool, I'm the first and the last. Cool, I'm the light of the world. Cool. Okay, cool. Jesus insisted no one comes to the Father except through me. Cool. So here we see claim Jesus, table 13.2. Jesus also declared his deity implicitly through parables. Cool, Pharisees. Doesn't matter. Because again, it doesn't matter. They're only going to choose the writings that match their theology. All the other ones are left out as apocrypha. That's why they're not in there. So stupid. So yeah, the argument is, sure, according to what's currently in the Christian Bible, yeah, Jesus claims to be God. I don't disagree with that. Blah, 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 divine actions. He acted as if he was God. Okay, cool. He said to the paralytic, son, your sins are forgiven. The scribes correctly responded, who can forgive sins but God alone? Okay, a new commandment, because God gives commandments. Healing lepers, blah, blah, blah. All of these people worship Jesus without one work of rebuke from him. Not only did Jesus accept the worship, he even commended those who acknowledge his deity. Cool, just like that guy in Australia now who says he's the reincarnation of Jesus. Great, so if you recognize that he's God, he'll be like, cool, I'm glad you get it. That doesn't mean he's God. The authors don't think he's God. Now let's put all of this into perspective. No one did it better than C.S. Lewis. Are you just... I don't want to yell a lot and upset my neighbors. I'm just... Why read the Bible when we could just read C.S. Lewis, guys? Oh my goodness. Ugh, nobody cares. Nobody cares. You just made the case yourself with actual biblical verses. And they're like, yeah, but if you really want to hear like how to really read it, C.S. Lewis, don't care. We're not even gonna just look at that. Oh, because I couldn't help but look at that. And when you have grasped that being like the parts that they went over, you will see that what this man said was, quite simply, the most shocking thing that has ever been uttered by human lips. I like how we're still adding that nice little condescension in there. Imagine your neighbor making these kinds of claims. I'm the first and the last, the self-existing one, blah, blah, blah. What would you think about your neighbor if he seriously said those things? You wouldn't say, gee, I think he's a great moral teacher. You'd say, this guy's nuts, because he definitely claiming to be God. Again, no one has articulated this point better than C.S. Lewis. I'm out of sounds. I'm out of sounds. Why am I reading this book when I could just read anything by C.S. Lewis, right? I'm here trying to prevent anyone saying the really foolish things that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept he's a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. I'm not even ready to accept that he's a great moral teacher for what I said in the beginning. That is one of the things we must not say. A man who was merely a man said the sort of things, blah, 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 blah. Either this man was and is the son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. Well, wait, why does he have to be the son of God, or a madman, or worse? What do you mean worse than a madman? Like a murderer? Why not this man was or is the son of God? Otherwise, he was a cult leader. He was misguided. But then, even if he's a madman or something worse, you, C.S. Lewis, say that he's still a great moral teacher, so it's not like it's that terrible. I mean, he's not a madman who's running around hurting people. He's a madman who's running around being a great moral teacher. So that's not terrible. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon. You can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. Or just ask him, like, hey, brother, what's going on? Do you need to go talk to somebody in a professional capacity? Let's go do that, man. Let's go. I'll take you. But let us not come up with any other patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. A man who was merely a man said the sort of thing Jesus would not be a great moral teacher. He would be rather a lunatic, or else he would be the devil of hell. How come they think that, okay, I don't accept him as God, but I do accept the devil of hell? As opposed to like the devil of what? Purgatory? You must make your choice. Either this man. So C.S. Lewis doesn't even think he's a good moral teacher. Okay, well, I mean, at least we agree. Lewis is absolutely right. Wait, so do you guys not think he's a great moral teacher? Since Jesus clearly claimed to be God, he couldn't just be a great moral teacher. Great moral teachers don't deceive people by falsely claiming to be God. They make claims that they know the path to happiness. I mean, that's a pretty bold claim to say, just follow what I'm doing and you'll be happy. That's pretty bold and usually falsifiable. Since Jesus claimed to be God, one of three possibilities was true. He's a liar, a lunatic, or the Lord. Liar doesn't fit the facts. He lives and taught the highest standard of ethics, and it's not like he would have laid down his life unless he really thought he was telling the truth. Which, again, did he have the option? He could be a lunatic. He uttered some of the most profound sayings ever recorded. Well, they're not defining lunatic, and they want us to have this idea that he's a madman, like C.S. Lewis said, or a lunatic, that he's just totally out of his mind. But we have plenty of people who are otherwise can fit within normal society, normal being what we see as the average. They can go to work, and they can pay their bills, and they can drive, and they can do all these things, but otherwise they have some off or magical thinking. That doesn't mean they're a lunatic. So one of the guys, like I mentioned, the guy in Australia who thinks he's Jesus, assuming he really believes it, he's not a lunatic in the sense of totally out of his mind, unable to control himself, and unable to put words together. I'm sure he said some things that are very nice. I've seen his preaching, and some of the things he says to people really helps or brings up some issues that they want discussed, and they feel heard. They feel somewhat healed by what's happening, or it kind of looks like the healing process is started from certain kind of childhood traumas or issues of guilt they've been carrying around, and then they unload it onto him, and he says a few words, and then they feel really healed, and that's probably the best way to phrase it. That's something that can be done by Jesus or the guy who thinks he's Jesus. You know, just a person who just happens to be pretty charismatic, maybe kind of good with psychology, makes people feel seen, heard, loved. That kind of person is really good at making seemingly profound statements. So what are these most profound sayings ever recorded? Where did Jesus say something that was the most profound thing ever recorded? Even as a Christian, I couldn't couldn't have told you. I can't tell you something that I believed as a Christian that I thought was especially profound. I thought Jesus was just talking about, yeah, so I'm cool, I'm God, I'm cool, and I'm God. And then that's about it. There was nothing that Jesus said that made me rethink life or anything like that, or helped me understand how to manage specific issues. There's nothing profound in that sense. It didn't make me reevaluate how I see the world. It was just like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Maybe you should do it too. That was kind of it. Nothing that wasn't said before. I don't know. It's weird that they have this idea. And everyone, even his enemies, he claimed that he's a man of integrity who taught the truth. What do you mean his enemies claimed he taught the truth? They're the ones that are stoning him for blasphemy. Didn't you just say that? Okay. Suddenly he's the best guy. And that simply leaves us with Lord. Okay, cool. So because we've only given ourselves 3 options and we haven't defined the second one and we don't like the first one, we've decided the third one's the only one true. Congratulations. We've manifested this into existence yet again. Peter Kreeft puts the argument very simply. Don't care about Peter. Why? But didn't you just say that C.S. Lewis did it the best? Now you're telling us Peter's going to do it the best? Jesus was either God, bad man, but he's not bad, so he's God. Oh my goodness. No. There are only 2 possible interpretations. Jesus is God or Jesus is not God. The argument in its simplest form looks like this. Jesus was either 1, God, if his claims about himself were true, or 2, a bad man, if what he said was not true. For good men do not claim to be God. But he was not bad man. If anyone in history was not a bad man, Jesus was not a bad man. Therefore, he was and is God. And the authors think that's a good argument, that it's a good summary. They like it so much they included it as a block quote for us to go check out with a footnote so we could read it for ourselves from the source. That's how much they like it. I guess it wasn't Barry that was the only guy in this chapter that couldn't hack it intellectually in college. Holy hell. This seems logical, but is Lord really the right conclusion? After all, it's one thing to claim to be God. Anybody can do that. But it's another thing to prove it, okay? We have this image here. I guess this is Figure 13.2. Was he a legend? No. Chapters 9 through 12. Who did he claim to be God in this chapter? His claims were false. He knew they're false, so he's a liar. He did not know they're false, so he's a lunatic. And both of these, liar and lunatic, point to, in light of Jesus' miraculous deeds, his resurrection, and his supreme conduct and teachings, the prophecies he fulfilled, and the fact that he would be unlikely to die for his own lie, a liar and lunatic are eliminated. No, they're not. What's supreme conduct? He went around annoying people. What's supreme conduct? He committed blasphemy. He curses a fig tree, insults his brothers, aka his disciples. I mean, obviously they're talking about other stuff where he's saying things like, I forgive your sins, and I'm going to heal you of this, and I'm going to tell you a story. There's nothing supreme about that. The prophecies he fulfilled, which, no, it says chapter 13, which is weird because they put this chapter earlier, and then they put chapter 13 here instead of just saying this chapter. Again, just lacking internal consistency, and it's on the same page. It's in the same figure. Attention to detail just not there. And that he would be unlikely to die for his own lie, so lunatic is eliminated. But if it's not his own lie, if he's just delusional to think he's the son of God, that's not a lie. That's not his own lie. That's a belief that he has. So wouldn't that mean that he would be willing to die for it? And that's assuming that he expects to die for what he's doing. None of this makes sense. All evidence points to Lord. He is Lord. That's it. That's how we know Jesus is God, because the authors can't construct a reasonable argument. That's it, guys. I'm not saying by far that all Christians are this stupid, but I am saying the authors are. Proofs that Jesus is God. He fulfilled numerous messianic, no. He lived a sinless life and performed miraculous deeds. We don't know that. We know there's claims, and I would say insulting his buddies, being condescending, claims of miraculous deeds. Again, we don't know this happened. He predicted and then accomplished his own resurrection from the dead. There's no proof, because they said he 3 unparalleled proofs. There's none of that. We've already given evidence regarding these messianic prophecies, miracles, and resurrection. What about the idea of Jesus being sinless? So Jesus said, which of you convicts me of sin? And none of them said anything. Neither did his disciples, who spent 3 years with him day and night, and they claimed he was sinless. Yeah, just like all of the people that spend time with their cult leaders while they do heinous things. They say, oh, this is a very good and sinless man. Are you for real? Come on, guys. Now you try spending 3 days with any human being, much less 3 years, and you'll definitely find faults. The New Testament writers said Jesus had none. Yeah, and we could totally believe them. They weren't biased at all. Come on. If we're going to accept that they're eyewitnesses, they're his cult members. And if they're going to talk about all the bad stuff Jesus did, that makes them look bad by association. It's so stupid. It wasn't just his friends who affirmed his supreme character. Christ's enemies couldn't find faults. The Pharisees, who were actively searching for dirt, could find none. They were just saying he's committing the sin of blasphemy. They just said that earlier in the chapter. They were ready to stone him because they thought he was blaspheming. Now, whether you guys personally believe that he's the Son of God, this is them still believing he's committing a sin. Proof of Christ's deity does not depend on his sinlessness, because the prophecies, miracles, and resurrection are great, but there's a few objections. Why wasn't Jesus more overt? So it looks like the authors are just saying that it's because how come Jesus didn't come out and say, I am God in the flesh? That's it. Okay, cool. He could have made more direct claims, but maybe he didn't because, number one, he didn't want interference from the Jews. Number two, Jesus could not be our supreme human example if he pulled rank every time he got into earthly trouble. Oh, no one would listen to him if he pulled rank. Would you listen to your neighbor if you pulled rank, just to use this argument the authors gave us a few paragraphs ago? Your neighbor's like, you can't arrest me. I'm God. Oh, whoa, sorry, bro. Sorry about that. I forgot you're God. Yeah, I'm not going to arrest you. No, you're just going to think he's nuts. Come on. Third, he had to be careful when he revealed his deity so he could go to the sacrificial atonement. If he had been too overt with his claims, they might not have killed him, but if he'd been too reserved, he might not have attracted enough to follow the message. Here's another question. Why does God have to end his own life to say, I forgive you of your sins? Finally, we have to understand the religious context. He says he's fulfilled the law. This will be like announcing in a Muslim country that one was fulfilling the will of Allah while apparently vilifying Muhammad and burning a copy of the Quran. Haha, it's no wonder Jesus used parables. Okay. But if he's supposed to be fulfilling prophecy, he's not burning a copy of the Quran, he's uplifting the Tanakh, right? He's saying, look at all of these things. I am your prophesied Messiah. They're not good at analogies. Oh, okay, never mind. It's not the authors. It's another author, N.T. Wright, who's also not good at analogies, which is why they chose him, because he speaks the way they speak. Okay, congratulations. No good reasons. Jesus indirectly proclaimed deity more often, so he claims to be God eventually. Indirect denials of deity. Critics often cite 3 specific occasions in the New Testament where the deity of Christ is called into question. Matthew 19:17, the rich young ruler calls Jesus good. Jesus appears to deny his deity by responding, no one is good but one, that is God. But the critics are mistaken. He's not denying his deity, he's affirming his deity by prompting the man to consider the implications of his statement. Well, even better is the way that I bring this up in class. I tell the students they can't use words like good, bad, ridiculous, silly, etc. because those are not words that are descriptive enough. So just saying he's good in what way? In effect, Jesus is asking, do you realize that you're calling me good? Are you saying that I'm God? Like, what kind of weirdo would even put that idea together? Hey, dude, that's some good stuff you're doing. Oh, what? You're saying that I'm God, bro? Because you're right. What? So humans can't do quote-unquote good things to help each other out? You're saying only God can do good things? This is one of the dumbest arguments. This is so poorly put together. Maybe that's why they can't use biblical verses to support their own claims, because it comes out like this. That's why they have to ask C.S. Lewis to package it up for them. These guys are just terrible authors. This is apparent from the context. Son of Man sits on the glorious throne. Second and third objections to Christ's deity have to do with Jesus being subordinate to the Father and limited in knowledge. The Father is greater than I. And then no one knows about the day or the hour, not the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. How can Jesus be God if he's subordinate and limited? Okay? The answer to both of these objections lies in a proper understanding of the Trinity. Let's state what the Trinity is not. The Trinity is not 3 gods, 3 modes of one God, or 3 divine essences. The Trinity is 3 persons in one divine essence. In other words, there's 3 persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, who share one divine nature. The Trinity is like a triangle. Triangle is 3 corners, but they still have one triangle. So I actually mentioned, I think in an earlier video, my students came up with a better description of how to explain this, and that was, I'm the same person, but I represent as 3 different ways depending on where I am. If I'm with my parents, I am their daughter. If I'm in class, I am your student. And if I'm with my friends, I am friend. I'm still the same person, but I have these three different facets to my personality. And that's, I thought, was a really good way to describe it. These three different aspects of God. Way better than the triangle analogy that I've heard in church and the triangle analogy that the authors are just defaulting to here, because heaven help them if they have one original idea. Jesus shares the one divine nature, but he also has a distinct human nature. Jesus is one who, okay, but the part of the problem is they're not defining what is divine nature, and that if Jesus is part of this divine nature, why doesn't he have divine knowledge? So they're just using words that don't really have a meaning, and they're just saying go with it. So we're seeing figure 13.3a. It's the triangle. The Son has human nature. So you're saying the human nature, even though he's divine, he still cannot tap into divine nature, but he can to perform miracles. So who, Son, what, human nature? But again, they're saying, because who is the Father, what is divine nature? Who is Holy Spirit, what is divine nature? Who is Son, what is human nature? But he's also going to have, again, how is he performing miracles if he doesn't have divine nature? How does this help us deal with the objections? Well, since he has two natures, whenever you ask him a question about him, you have two questions. For example, did Jesus know the time of his second coming? As a God, yes. As a man, no. Well, then the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Plus, up here, it's saying that no one knows about the day or the hour, not the angels in heaven, nor the Son. It's not saying nor the human version of me. It's not saying nor my humanness or nor my human nature. It's saying Son of God, that part of the triangle. It's not telling us anything other than nobody knows except God, the Father. Did Jesus get hungry? As a God, no. As a man, yes. So yes, he's hungry. So Jesus ate. Do you know what I mean? Did Jesus get tired? As a God, no. As a man, yes. Yes, so he slept. So the answer is yes. Did Jesus know all things? As a God, yes. As a man, no. So as a man, yes. So yes. Because he has to obey his natures. He has to eat, he has to sleep. Which also means he knows his second coming and he knows everything. The answer is just yes for everything. This is so bizarre. The Trinity also helps us understand the sense in which Jesus declared the Father is greater than I. The Father and Son are equal in essence, but different in function. This is analogous to human relationships. Earthly Father is equally human with his Son, but the Father holds a higher office. So Jesus and the Father have different offices, but they're both equally God. Okay. So now we're saying God is, I guess that's what they're saying by divine nature. They're saying it's some kind of breed or species, but they still haven't told us what is divine nature. Jesus never loses his divine nature. Okay. Objections to the Trinity. Some people say it's, so despite what some skeptics may say, the Trinity is not illogical or against reason. Saying there's one God and three gods would be illogical, but saying there's one God who has three persons is not illogical. It may be beyond reason, but it's not against reason. If you want to know more about it, because one of the arguments is not only skeptics, quote unquote, but it's also from Muslims. Just ask Hindus, because they have the Trimurti, this three forms of God in one. This isn't even something that is from Christianity originally. So this argument about objections to the Trinity, this concept doesn't just exist in Christianity. That doesn't mean the Trinity can be completely understood. After all, no finite being can completely comprehend an infinite God, but we can apprehend the Trinity, just like we apprehend but do not completely comprehend the ocean. When we're standing on the beach, we can apprehend there's an ocean in front of us, even though we can't completely comprehend its vast magnitude. Some Muslims charge that the Trinity is too complex. How am I predicting all of this so well? My goodness. But who said that the truth must always be simple? As C.S. Lewis puts it, if Christianity was something we were making up, of course we could make it easier, but it's not. We cannot compete in simplicity with people who are inventing religions. How could we? We are dealing with fact. Of course, anyone can be simple if he has no facts to bother about. That's one of the issues that I do have with Christians as well. They claim to know how to get to heaven. They claim to know what God wants, but we can't know God. And that's the part. It's like, well, then how do you know that you got the ideas about sin correct? How do you know how to get to heaven? How do you know what heaven's supposed to be like? How do you know what Jesus wants for your life? How do you know this if you also say that you cannot comprehend God? How do you know he created the universe, and how do you know he's the great I am and there's no other gods outside of him if you can't comprehend him? You can't keep going to, well, I can't explain it, therefore he's outside of our understanding. But let me go find some other apologists who probably can explain it better. And I think it's pretty cowardly, slipping away from the crowd, if you will, to basically say, well, yeah, all the parts that don't make sense about the Trinity, that's because God he also doesn't make sense to us, because we're small, so mysterious ways. Stupid. Some critics and cult leaders have suggested the Trinity is a later invention of the church, but it's not true. The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are referred to as God in the scriptures. If the Trinity is not accepted by the early church fathers, it doesn't mean it's false. Okay. Truth is not determined by a majority vote. The doctrine of the Trinity is sound scripturally as well as philosophically. No, it's not. You just said we can't explain it fully, ... mysterious ways. That's not a philosophical truth then. Jeez. In fact, instead of creating theological problems, it actually solves theological problems, helps us understand how love existed for all eternity, triunity, perfect fellowship of love, blah, 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 blah. He simply chose to create us and loves us in accordance with his loving nature. In fact, his love is why he sent his son to take punishment for our sins. I mean, that's such a bizarre thing. If he loves us, then make sure to teach us about him existing, at least, number one. Number two, maybe don't hate our nature. If you love us and you want us to be with you, why create us in a way that will naturally separate us from you? That doesn't make any sense. Why not just create us as angels in heaven to be with you? We're not brainwashed. I mean, Satan had free will to rebel, right? So why not just create us with you so we can be with you and we can love you? Why are you creating us with this weird divide and then having to murder yourself? And that's how we solve it? That's the most loving way to do it, is to murder yourself after we've slaughtered a bunch of sheep and ox? That's it? Summary and conclusion. I'm not going to read it because I'd rather put my head through the monitor than rehash any of this. I guess the clown makeup was a very appropriate choice today. This was... I don't know how the authors continue to outdo themselves with terrible arguments. And here we are. I was really beside myself with the constant quoting of everything except the Bible, but then once they got to actually quoting the Bible, they really couldn't put two ideas together to make a lick of sense anyway, so I guess that's why they keep quoting everything else. But I will say that bringing up Charlton Heston playing Moses in the movie The Ten Commandments, that was pushing it, you guys. Come on. That's ridiculous. If you guys made it this far, I appreciate it. You were truly just powering through with me, and you guys are the only reason that I really suffer through this. This isn't helping me in any way, but I know that you guys enjoy it, so that's why I keep doing it, and I love to see what you guys have to say, and that's also why I keep posting these, just to hear from you guys and hear your own take on it. Some stuff you guys have to say is really interesting, really educated, or just really funny, and I really appreciate it. With that being said, if you guys want to check out the details section below and find out different ways to contact me or support me, that would be pretty awesome. We've got a Discord link in there. You can join for free and just hang out, have a good time. And we also have some different ways you can join the cult, because obviously I'm the Messiah. Did you see how many awesome prophecies that I had just in this video alone? Make sure to drink the lemonade and get yourself a membership here on YouTube, or you can join us on Patreon. Doing so lets you get an advanced viewing of the videos without ads, and also access to a one-time per month live stream that's only for members. So I hope to see you guys there. Otherwise, you can always do like a super thanks if you don't want to join, but you do want to help me buy makeup, wigs, or headache medicine. With that being said, as always, thanks for listening.
In this unholy chapel, hear the whispers of the night, where demons sing praises with voices steeped in spite. The lemonade's bitter, but the devil takes a sip. He dances in the darkness, his